own sakes for our better understanding of this. And again, I will now hand over for the first panel to our chair, to my colleague Jennifer.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I suppose just to echo my colleagues' comments about the warm welcome from CIT, it's really great for them to host us today. Can I ask the panel to come forward and take their seats, please? And while they're doing that, just to say that I suppose we're starting a conversation here today. We're not expecting to get all the answers. We're not expecting to close out this topic today. It's very much about starting something that will be a major piece of work for THEA in the future. I do have a list of prepared questions for the panel, but look, we want to make this an open conversation. So if at any time you would like to come in, comment on something the panel has said, put forward an alternative topic for discussion, please raise your hand and we will bring you into that as much as we can. So while they're getting settled, I'll just introduce our panel to you. So we're delighted to be joined here today by, first of all, my colleague Sean O'Reilly, our data analyst, who has done all of the background work and analysis on the data, which informed the paper that underpins this particular event today. We're delighted to be joined by William Bosang from the Department of Education and Skills, Colm Downs from the Irish Universities Association, Terry Maguire from the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning, Claire McGee from IBEC, Anya Nihei from CIT, Derek O'Byrne from Waterford IT, Roisin O'Connell, our THEA Head of Communications, John O'Connor from QQI, Nessa White from ETBI, and Stephanie Kelly from the Students' Union here in CIT, our student representative. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sean, who's going to present for about 10 minutes or so on the data in the paper. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. You'll notice there have been several references to presenting briefly and for 10 minutes. My working assumption, really, is that you have, of course, all read the discussion paper thoroughly. But therefore, I will take a very brief sort of step through some of the issues. I'm not going to cover all of the issues in the discussion paper. I'm simply going to leave a series of prompts there that will then lead into the discussion that follows thereafter. I suppose, first of all, it is worth placing our discussions in an international context. So the Short Cycle Higher Education Award was first mentioned in discussions around the Bologna framework in 2005. Short Cycle Higher Education has been long-term integral to technological sector in Ireland. There's no question about that. But the discussions internationally, although they started sort of almost 14 years ago, it took until 2018 for the Short Cycle Higher Education Award to be formally included in the framework. But nevertheless, for the audience in this room, for the audience actually watching the live stream, Short Cycle and the suite of qualifications within technological higher education is very well known, with the wonderful variety of progression options. So in theory, at least, we have 2 + 1 + 1, 3 + 1, 2 + 2, maybe 4 - 1, maybe 3 -. The boundaries are not necessarily as clear as an external person might assume. But one of the issues that becomes critical when we start to look at the evidence base, let's actually focus on evidence, let's try to ground our discussions in what evidence is currently available, and also perhaps to identify what evidence would be useful in the future if we can make it available. Level 6 and 7 provision is treated in unison by lots of other bodies. Now, this may well be because it's predominantly in the technological sector and some private colleges as well, but certainly it's very common to talk about level 6 and 7 and then the rest of the system. So that highlights one of the first issues with the discussion paper. There is a caveat in the discussion paper that actually says, I have taken level 6 and 7 combined data from CAO and sought to actually work through what the pattern of demand looks like. This figure corrects that. So just to be absolutely clear, the level 6 number of applicants are unchanged from the discussion paper. The level 8 number of applicants are unchanged from the discussion paper. But the level 7 number of applicants in the discussion paper should be corrected to these numbers here. However, the fundamental message doesn't change. If we look at the number of students who select a level 6 or a level 7 or a level 8 through the CAO process, then we're looking at significant decline at level 6, not insignificant decline at level 7, and this perhaps a slow shift towards level 8. If we work through the CAO process, so apply, mention, first preference, offer made, are those places actually accepted by students, then looking at level 6 there, we're talking about close to a 50% decrease in the number of places accepted. Critically, in addition to that, of the offers made to CAO applicants, a very large proportion of level 6 and level 7 offers are not accepted. Now, anecdotally, this might be because related to how the way that the system works, or related to the fact somehow an individual hangs on for a level 8 offer. And perhaps certain applicants will take a level 8 offer over anything else. But do we know that? At the moment, we're just looking at the data that is readily available. Let's take Joe's prompt and sort of counterbalance this discussion. Now, I don't want to go into enormous detail on this because Valerie Harvey from the HEA is talking in particular about the Graduate Outcomes Survey this afternoon. But 2 separate reports using the available data, published by the HEA and the HEA in conjunction with the CSO to combine the data sets that are available, basically say, for level 6 and 7 graduates, close to 3/4 continue in educational training, either full-time or part-time. Almost 1/4 are in employment, either full-time or part-time. So for those students who successfully graduate a level 6 or 7 program, the figures actually look very, very positive. However, and again, Joe touched on this, another set of figures about, okay, what about students who successfully continue within their programs or complete their programs, then the proportion of students who, according to the currently available data, do not progress, they're too high at level 6. There's no other way of looking at that data other than saying it is a particular data set. The recent HEA progression reports in particular have analysed the data in quite a sophisticated way and actually said, well, one, this is not something for our sector to be defensive about. The wonderful statement that actually students are as likely to progress in certain technological institutions than in other institutions. So there's all those caveats in there. Prior educational attainment is a key influence, but it's not that simple. Just taking one stat out of the report, more than half of the students with the lowest CEO points band successfully completed their program. And of course, the data doesn't actually capture the reasons for students not completing. We don't know that. The HEA report, and the reports are very good, very sophisticated, but they're not a complete picture, and this is why we want to start some of this discussion. But this looks at currently the number of full-time students who still appear in the same institution in March of year 2. So there's all sorts of issues. Why have students left? Have students gone from full-time to part-time? Have students left and come back? So there are various pieces here. Now, particularly I should mention the Irish Survey of Student Engagement. 9 out of the 12 technological institutions this year added an optional question around exploring with students why, or have you considered seriously withdrawing from your programme? And if so, what were the reasons? Now, literally, 2019 ISI data is due in institutions within a week or two, and I'm not sure of the exact date, which is an interesting sort of change of role for me, but it's imminent, just from a very initial analysis of the collective data. That is looking like, for our sector, 60% of students, roughly, have said they haven't seriously considered withdrawing. 15%, approximately, have said yes, now they are still there, they were there to take the survey, but they did seriously consider withdrawing for family or personal reasons. 13% said for financial reasons. Now there's a lot more analysis and interpretation and disaggregation of that needed, and those institutions who offered the question will want to look at that. But it's not perhaps a perfect match with some of the anecdotes. And again, we have to look at what data is actually available. Within our institutions, we have students taking programs at level 6, level 7, level 8. In some instances, I suggest in the same lecture hall or in the same teaching and learning scenario for certain elements of their provision. But the question is, what's the experience of different students? The National Forum has had a key focus on teaching for transitions, is looking at the whole learning analytics project to shine a light on some of these issues as well. What other data might be useful? Just to pick up, again, one sample of what might be there, using the collated data, so not at institution level, just looking at our sector, then 3 years of the current ISI question set, 2 questions, more level 6 students appear to be reviewing their notes, or they appear to be reporting that they review their notes more frequently than level 7, 8 students. What does that mean? Equally, only 36% of level 6 respondents to the survey said they've asked another student to help them to understand course material. What does that actually mean? Is that a student with a different behaviour or a different characteristic, or is that a student perhaps not feeling overly confident sat in a larger group that have come from various sources? We need to start looking at this data to actually explain to ourselves in the first instance, not to anybody else, explain to ourselves what's going on, what works. I'm not going to go into enormous detail about the progression from further ed into higher ed either, other than to say Andrew Brownlee from Solus will be speaking this afternoon as well. But this is another example of looking for data, analysing the data, seeing what's there, and pulling out some messages from it. Now, one interesting fact from it, of course, in 2017, 20% of all undergraduate entrants to our sector were PLC graduates. So, how does that statement sit alongside an apparent pressing need to deal with transition from further education into higher education as a whole? There are questions, there are issues, we want to see what's actually going on. It has to be said, there's a lot of work ongoing, and I'm sure Andrew will speak about some of that this afternoon, about improving, collecting and analysing the data set around further education and training. But it is just worth saying, most of the data for further education originates at the public data, at the point of certification. So arguably, for a higher education audience, it's quite different to the non-progression reports published about the higher education sector. So there's a difference there. It's fine. We can work with it. We can work towards seeing how they might come together, but don't accidentally assume they're exactly comparable. If we look at skill provision, then some of the data would actually suggest, yes, there is a clear place for level 6 and 7. Now, we are moving towards an area where the data starts to become increasingly sparse, and we're looking for data from multiple separate sources to see what's going on. But if we just look at the Springboard Plus data there, that reads to me like there is a definite place in that provision for level 6 and 7. So some parts of the system, some policy makers, some funding sources regard a key role for 6 and 7. But to counter that argument, if we look at some of the data and reports produced by the expert group, then we had computing mentioned earlier on today already. We're looking at forecasting high-level ICT skills. There appears to be a real focus on level 8. If we look at biopharma, it perhaps is a similar focus on level 8. So the data by itself, without understanding, without complementary data sources, presents something of a mixed picture. But perhaps some of this, perhaps, may be related to perceptions rather than real needs. So in terms of my formal introduction this morning, it's really to just touch through a number of the key issues in the discussion paper. Discussion paper deliberately circulated in advance. This today is not a vision for the future of technological higher education. This is the beginning of a discussion to actually move us towards a shared, collaboratively developed vision of what we want to achieve collectively. And particularly, as already said a couple of times this morning, this is a discussion that requires engagement well beyond people within technological institutions. But those people within technological institutions have an absolutely key role to play in that. At which point, I'm going to step back, turn back to Jennifer, and the more interesting part of the morning begins.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think I'm going to stand over here so that I can see everybody, because it's a rather large panel and there are some people who are hidden behind the podium. John, I'm going to start with you. So Sean mentioned at the start about putting the short cycle higher education in context. So, and he mentioned that it took, 13 years to get it into the Bologna framework. So is that description of the short cycle qualification that's like 120 ECTS credits, higher education award that goes into the Bologna framework, is that still, you think, generally accepted by our stakeholders? And is our thinking on short cycle, or the trend in short cycle and maybe the decline that we're starting to see, whether it's deliberate, accidental, is that in line with what's happening in other countries? So any comments on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to THEA for inviting us to the colloquium today. Is it okay? Can you hear? And thanks for the very interesting and provocative paper, which I think kind of sets a pattern for the way we can do this kind of work by gathering the evidence, the knowledge, brokering that with the political interests around this debate. But I'm not a huge fan of evidence-based policy, but I do like the idea of evidence-informed policy, where you get the brokering right between the quality of the knowledge and the data and the various interests that are involved in a particular piece of work. So, and I very much welcome your commitment to widen and deepen the debate and the conversation and the further accumulation of high-quality knowledge, so we better understand this space. I'm not making any assumptions here. I work for QQI, which is an external quality assurance agency for post-school education and training. We're also an awarding body, so we certify, we issue short-cycle higher education qualifications, higher certificates, a small number, and it's been flatlining for the last number of years along the time scale that you've looked at yourself. We also do issue the advanced certificate, which is this was a sister qualification at level 6 in the National Framework Qualification. This numbers are holding up quite well. Some changes, maybe in reaction to apprenticeship post-2008. Peak again with the professionalisation of early childhood care and education. Otherwise, holding up quite well. On the question on the conceptualisation, and is that an acceptable conceptualisation? I'm probably going to give two answers. One is yes, and one is maybe. On the yes side, on short cycle higher education, yes, this is in terms of academic recognition of this qualification. I mean, some of you will know about the history of the higher certificate, short cycle higher education. The national certificate recast as the higher certificate, the advent of the National Framework of Qualifications in 2003. It reflected a particular consensus at that time, the useful qualification at that time. It's important to bear in mind that qualifications reflect a particular consensus at a particular time. We, and people in this room, led the referencing of the Irish framework to the Bologna framework, the self-certification of the Irish National Framework Qualifications to the Bologna framework in 2006, and in 2009 we referenced the National Framework Qualifications to the European Qualifications frameworks. And I'll come back to both of those, but that European lens is useful on the domestic debate. But there was no doubt back in 2006 when we certified the short cycle higher education, the higher certificate was considered a short cycle higher education qualification, an intermediate qualification then within the first cycle. So it was really defined by its relationship with the bachelor degree. In terms of academic recognition, the higher certificate, there doesn't seem to be any problem domestically, particularly within the technological higher education institutions, full recognition of the 120 credits. It's norm practice international in terms of the volume of this qualification. That domestic recognition, not so sure about whether the extent of the full extent of the credits is equally recognized in all of higher education nationally. The recognition, the domestic recognition, is supported because we have domestic quality assurance arrangements that are in line with European norms. We've implemented the European Credit Transfer Scheme for this particular qualification. We issue diploma supplements if students exit with this particular qualification. So there's a range of support mechanisms that gives this qualification a national legitimacy and international recognition. One of our functions in QQI is we provide recognition of foreign qualifications, and we promote the recognition of Irish qualifications when they're presented abroad. We're having no difficulties when the higher certificate, short cycle higher education qualifications in Ireland are presented in other jurisdictions, even in other countries where they don't have short cycle higher education. This qualification is well recognized. So the first part of the answer is yes, it's widely accepted in terms of academic recognition. I think your paper has asked questions about qualifications as a social construct. Do they maintain the value? Do they maintain the confidence that they may have had? And we can't take that for granted. We can't take the social consensus that we had around the higher certificate or the national certificate 20 years ago, 15, 18 years ago. It is useful to revisit the assumptions we have around the value of a qualification. And your paper asked that question, saying, well, is the purpose of short cycle higher education still fit? And is the higher certificate still fit for purpose? So I think there's a question on fitness of purpose and fitness for purpose that your paper invites us to think about. So that's the maybe piece on the social value acceptance of the qualification. Are there concerns, are there doubts, are there questions around that? I think you've rightly raised a question mark around that. I think the second part of the question was just around some of the European developments. I'll do this fairly quickly. We're probably out of step with a lot of European developments. I mean, Sean mentioned the Paris communique, which I suppose reflected practice in many ways, in the growth, in the importance of short cycle higher education in Europe. Rather than maybe leading practice, it reflected that practice. So there's a lot of interest in this level and this qualification in many other countries, and we see a growing importance of it internationally. So in some ways we're a little bit out of step. Okay, maybe countries like England have seen a significant decline in sub-bachelor qualifications, but for their own particular reasons that people maybe talk about later on, and those kind of rationalities or funding pressures don't really apply here to this context. And we're always a little bit careful about looking around Europe and saying, why can't we be more like them, or what can we learn from them? But there's probably some useful learning experiences. We have a quick view around Europe at short cycle higher education, but I might zoom out a little bit to NFQ level 6 or EQF level 5, which I think may be interesting for us to have a look at. Short cycle higher education in the countries participating in Bologna, it's about 48 countries, I think. 50% of those countries have short cycle higher education. In those countries that have short cycle higher education, participation rates, or the proportion of students in the higher education system that are registered on short cycle higher education can range from 3% to 40%. And looking at your paper, looks like about 11% in your sector. So it's going to be low. It's going to be a lower figure nationally in higher education here. In terms of progression rates to higher education internationally, we see practice varying from 25% of people with short cycle higher education progressing to bachelor's, 25% to 75%. Your paper suggests within the technological higher education institutions around a 73% progression level. So at the top end internationally, and that's probably worth thinking about, is these qualifications primarily oriented towards progression in terms of the balance between occupational profile, occupational orientation, or progression for further study. I think that space, that we call it level 6 domestically, EQF, European Qualifications Framework, level 5, is zooming out the lens a little bit, not just looking at short cycle higher education, but looking at level 6, that crossover area between sometimes upper secondary, further education, vocational education training, and higher education training. That's a very interesting space and of growing importance internationally, not losing importance. There's greater growth in qualifications, greater interest in this particular level internationally, this bridging function at this particular level. And you see a huge diversity of qualifications at this level. Academic qualifications, professional qualifications, vocational qualifications. And when I use the term vocational qualifications, programs preparing people to work in a particular occupation without the need for further study. That's what I mean by vocational education training orientation. So we see a great variety and diversity at NFQ level 6 internationally, let's say. Occupational, professional, yes, also for further study. And we see strong growth in countries like France with the brevet, the master craftsperson qualification in Luxembourg, Croatia, those countries. Really strong growth at NFQ level 6. I think reflecting a lot of demand for advanced technical professionals, junior management, that intermediate level demand, that demand for intermediate level skills, definitely in a European context, is doing well. Is there a difference in our labour market? Do we have a different structure of our labour market where there isn't that demand for intermediate level skills? I think warrants some further investigation. In terms of the students internationally that participate in short cycle higher education, yeah, maybe similar to here, non-traditional background, a vocational background quite often. So the associate degree in the Netherlands, introduced around 2006, is intended to have about 20% of higher education participation. It's well short of that, but about 70% of people going into the associate degree in the Netherlands, short cycle higher education, they come from a vet background. They've done upper secondary vocational education training. We don't have upper secondary vocational education training in our school system. We don't have that. And we're very unusual in that respect. But you can see what's the pathway into short cycle higher education. And definitely I think you see the growth in short cycle higher education in European context, whether it's in the EQF zone or the Bologna zone, qualifications that have that strong vocational orientation and are well accepted and popular, particularly when employers, professional bodies have been involved in the development, the design, the delivery, assessment of those qualifications. You see very high level acceptance and strong levels of growth.
Thank you very much. I might maybe just skip the running order that I have in front of me for the moment, because you've touched on that idea of progression and the different routes into higher education. So maybe, Nessa, I might ask you maybe to think about, from your perspective, or as a perspective of you and your colleagues, about the ideal relationship between the short cycle high E qualification and the FET qualification. And I suppose a follow-on question then would be about progression from further education and training into higher education. Is it now firmly fixed on people trying to get into level 8 programs?
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so interestingly, the relationship piece, while you asked the question around the framework and the relationship there, today provides me with an insight into how it's actually the relationships between us in the room that's also crucial to any success that we can make in this area. And I suppose before I answer your question directly, I think really we need to have the courage to lean in, to lose our armour around how ours is better than yours, or we do differently, or we're special and ours is different. Like Barry said earlier about we're different, you know. So I think in terms of the relationship piece, that's a crucial. That's actually at the core of any success this opportunity provides us. And the paper has really, really opened up the thinking that we need on this. So if we look at the ideal relationships and the coherence that we need to come to, I think we in the FET sector have to acknowledge that we do have a multi-program structure that could benefit from some review, streamlining, looking at the content, looking at what our colleagues in the higher ed side are delivering. And I suppose a lot of evidence that we have that is culminating here today is like the work of the Transitions Reform Subgroup. Many of the people on the panel are involved. And I suppose they're really good examples of how THEA, ETBI, and other organisations are now collaborating, so we can strengthen the personal and professional relationships, but also strengthen the relationships in terms of how we do progress. I think a review of our content, our standards, our progression, as Sean mentioned earlier, you know, looking at the data in further ed is something that we really have to look at to inform what it is that we're measuring against what you're measuring and what the outputs are. And I think we're very much open to that. In our work with SOLAS and QQI, we have transitioned and are still transitioning to a different place. Education and training boards are now in a different place for a variety of reasons, some of which you're now familiar with yourselves in aggregation and the emergence of TUs. But it does require a really honest reflection of where we're at. How do we build on what we have? And again, remembering, why are we all here? Barry mentioned at the outset of why we're here today. We are here not to tick all the boxes like the value for money piece and all of that. Of course we want to do all of that. But we're actually here to make the learner have the choice to progress, whether that's, and this probably answers your second question, it doesn't have to be linear anymore. I believe, as Joe mentioned, it doesn't have to be that you go from level 6 and level 8 is the only option that you think you have. I mean, there are many people who take a variety of options, and I think we have to question the perceptions that we have around all of that. Is our measure of success, you know, that you progress from one level to the next? Is it not okay that I'm actually interested in this because my line of work is this area and I'm going to add that on? So I think we have an opportunity in terms of broadening our thinking on the progression piece, and how we respond to that is probably crucial in further and higher ed. And I suppose today really fills me with enthusiasm. So when we have these honest conversations in a space where we can actually reflect on what we're doing without the armour of defensiveness or all of the things that as human beings we bring, I think we can really make progress, and I absolutely look forward to it and welcome it.
Thank you very much. Does anybody in the audience have any comment on that or any of the issues that John has raised? No, quiet, okay. William, the department's view in this whole area of the relationship or the optimal relationship between further education and training. We've heard a lot now recently about a better, more integrated tertiary sector. How do you see this all working ideally?
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
So I actually read the paper twice on the train down, and it's really great to see that range of issues being put out for discussion today. And I really would like to echo or just say what Nessa said is absolutely spot on. We have to avoid a kind of turf war around this issue. You can see in trying to make sure the issues are all set out, there's a tone, not a deliberate, I think, but it's sort of saying, well, arguments are made around how things should from the outside might be seen as kind of, arcane or obscure enough issues around how the system or different elements of the system will balance out or play things out and collaborate to kind of to provide programs in those areas. But I think that the main point that struck me, and I'd be very interested in the perspectives from the audience, what do we do to make sure that when we're talking about level 6 and level 7 in 5 years' time, people saying, well, there isn't a level 6 and a level 7. And just the one further point I'd play into that, it's interesting the paper, there's part of the paper, proves I've read it, page 19, and it's something Sean mentioned, talking about the Technology 22, the ICT Skills Action Plan, and the sort of sense from the underpinning research for that work that, well, employers aren't interested in anything except the high-end level 8 and above. And indeed, when we did the Technology 22 work, and colleagues here will be aware of this, we focused very deliberately on unpicking that a bit and finding other routes and other pathways where people could meet ICT skill needs across all sectors, rather than defaulting to this sort of perspective that it's level 8 or bust. And it's interesting then when you turn to the end of the paper, when it discusses where the level 6, I think, is vibrant, is live, is working, it's in areas where there's an openness to link the provision very, very explicitly to vocational and vocational training, to employment opportunities, that kind of embedded approach that the Institutes of Technology and the Technological University of the Future will bring to this area. So it's just playing out, I think it'd be very interesting to play out in discussion, this sort of balance between the high-end level 8, demand falling, nobody interested in 6 and 7, as opposed to what's happening on the ground when you look at Springboard and when you look at apprenticeships.
Thank you. I might just come to Anya and Derek then. So as the sort of chief academic officers in major institutions, do the data that's presented here today, did it surprise you? Does it reflect what you see on the ground? Like, are we seeing a shift in what 6 and 7 is used for? Not necessarily direct entry programs from CAO, but more for Springboard Plus type, upskilling, reskilling. What's your own experience? Maybe Anya?
Yeah, it was interesting to look at the graphics because I'd seen that graphic about the declining acceptance rate for level 7 offers earlier in this year, when we came across a real challenge in CIT, when we have a very successful program, very well regarded by industry in the area of automotive, but we were getting the feedback from guidance counsellors, from prospective students and so on, that we didn't have presence on the level 8 list. So while there was a complex financial case in putting this program together, we had to respond. So it was like that example alone, in terms of the CAO perspective, certainly the graphs that have been presented there by Sean in the report are of no surprise to us in CIT. And at the moment we're working on the basis of, generally when it comes to CAO processing in August, we normally, when we're looking at our data and in putting out those level 7 offers, we will normally work on the assumption that if a candidate is offered any of the first 4 of the options they've selected on the level 8 list, they're likely to take that over a level 7 offer or a level 6 offer. But that said, there is still huge demand for level 7 in a more strategic sense, and indeed for level 6. Certainly, and still in relation to the CAO, and picking up on what William has said there in terms of the tie to vocational and training issues. You would walk into the Kingsley Hotel or the Hayfield Manor and you'll meet graduates of our level 6 in the culinary area who've completed, are actually in the middle of completing a 120 credits programme, and that is recognised as being a high quality qualification with placement experience and so on there. So definitely there's that link. There's the link to the new apprenticeships, certainly, and there's a complex task there because there's a drive in relation to the compact to meet the institution objectives, what's expected of us there, and there's a high support from industry at the top level. It can be a little bit more complex for individual institutions to realise the placement opportunities there. And then I suppose looking to areas such as special purpose awards then, and heading into the whole area of our engagement with the wider society. If I might select, for example, a highly successful special purpose award there that was delivered last year in relation to women in entrepreneurship, the REN network, delivered in conjunction with Ballyhowra here locally. And I was at the presentation of the awards that night, and the buzz and the absolutely tangible impact that has in community shows the value. So I think, you know, just taking those examples, a lot of that, the overall top level data that Sean has presented has come of no surprise to me in preparing for today, and we can certainly come up with instances to support the various arguments. But if it's a more sophisticated argument than a pure numbers game with CAO.
Yeah, I might just take that point up, because maybe there's another way of looking at this, and I don't think we can actually talk about the level 6 provision without looking at the totality of what actually happens, particularly in the technological education sector and the development of that sector. And if you look at the strengths in particular of us as a sector, we are particularly good at dealing with diversity. We're particularly good at dealing with different types of students at different levels and different standards. We have a variety in different ranges of awards, and we deal with all of this kind of flexibility, access, allowing students to come in, to come out, to come back. We cut our curriculum in particular ways so that we can upskill, we can do the minor awards, we can do all sorts of special purposes, we can tailor specific things to industry, and this model of flexibility in how we cut our curriculum. And if we go back to the origin of level 6s and 7s, that was the start of that, where we started with this level 6, then add on, then to 8, and then we emerged from that into this very dynamic model of education provision. And perhaps that success in itself is the problem we're now dealing with. Because I think what we've done is we've put this boundary around a level 6 award. And it's now something, it's a different type of entity. It sits out there, and we do that in many different ways. And one of the kind of very subtle pieces on the paper that John May wrote, and maybe worth reflecting on, is I think there's a difference between students deciding to take level 8 and students not taking level 6. And it's very subtle, but at one level, we've created that structure. And we've created that structure in multiple ways. For instance, we have this sense of 2 CAO lists. Okay, gives people a choice. Most candidates who get a level 8 award get a level 8 offer, get a level 6-7 offer as well. Okay, we also talk about, and I think somebody said it earlier, the 2+1+1, which actually creates a kind of sense that, you know, you've got the express train to an honours award, or you build it up stage by stage, stopping at some rural towns as you go. And that's not the reality of what our level 6 portfolio is, far from it. And even more so, I think we've allowed a conversation that sometimes the level 6-7 list is the backup list. If you don't get it right, something goes wrong, you always have the level 6 and you can get in. And again, that's fundamentally not what our level 6 portfolio is about, and we have some very, very strong, dedicated programs in level 6 that command very high points and command very great respect, as Anya was saying. So if you look at that context and think, well, there's a behavioural consequence from there, and we've allowed that behavioural consequence to grow, and it goes back maybe to that social value of an award that John was talking about earlier. And here's maybe some provocative questions on that. I'm not sure quite, I always get the explanation, but I'm not quite sure what the difference between a 2+1+1 and an ab initio 4 actually is. Okay? I go one further. I'm even more now confused, because if you pick up the CAO handbook for this year, and I actually did it yesterday as a test, flick through, and you'll see the number of institutions that actually offer some kind of embedded or exit award. Practically all of the technological sector have got embedded awards of some type, size, or description in their portfolio. That's the 4-1-1. Okay? What's the difference between the 2+1+1 and the 4-1-1? We're going to get tied up with this. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you look at the structure of technological education, all of these awards are embedded within them. The 4-1-1 actually probably is a better way of looking at the way our curriculum is structured. We have all of these awards. The higher cert is actually a very integral part of what we do as an organization, as a learning experience. The first 2 years of an IoT technological university structure is not going to go away. That learning that people get in those 2 years will always be there. The short cycle will always be a fundamental part of what we do. Okay? How we construct it, how we perceive it, may be a different question. And my final thought on that is, the more we create boundaries that differentiate level 6 as an award, as different, as part of something else, the more we're going to have the problem of people picking level 8s over level 6s. And I think that's what we need to break down. How are we creating those boundaries and how we can remove them?
Terry, you'd like to come in there?
Yes, I will. I disagree with you because 4 minus 1 minus 1 is actually from the students, it's a failure. I've signed up for a level 8 and now I had to leave after 2 years. And I think part of the problem we have with level 6s and level 8s is that a level 6 award vis-a-vis an exit award, they're not the same thing. And if we think about them as the same thing, then it's not going to work. Because in our whole program review and our whole program development, we think about a level 8 and what the student will actually have gained as they come out. We don't give that thought if it's an exit award. It's kind of half a level 8 program. So if we really want a level 6 to work, we have to see it as an award that's actually coherent in itself. And from, if I put my hat as a head of lifelong learning on my past career, where in THEA we had 43% for our part-time, level 6 awards that we had, they were key in terms of access. And James, I think Sean mentioned that, John mentioned that level 6s are leading to progression. Yeah, so they're leading to progression. But people sometimes need time to be able to get to that space. So the fact that having done a level 6, they now have the confidence to actually go to a level 7 and a level 8. I think in terms of supporting student success, we need to be really careful about taking away pathways that for some students are access routes to higher education. And I think we need to be very cautious about it. And I think, and I agree very much with what you said about FET and HE working together. If 1 in 5 of our students are coming from FET now, we have to remember they're the same people. They're just with us at different times. And it's up to us to make sure that we have these seamless pathways and seamless progressions for them as they're going forward.
Sorry, Andrew Power, IEDT. I find myself in the embarrassing situation of disagreeing with Terry and agreeing with Derek. I certainly don't see a student who takes an exit award as a failure. Students who may have intended to complete a level 8 leave for all sorts of reasons. Maybe they have a very successful time, so successful they've got a job, and they want to leave early and take up a job offer, or do something else, or go on to a different course. So I think it's a vital component of what we do is to allow students to take exit awards when it suits their life circumstances. And I see them as part of our successes, not as a failure.
I just come in there and say that's okay, providing that we've actually asked the students and we know that that's the answer. I think we're making a lot of assumptions. There's lots of numbers that were actually pure numbers. Behind every one of those numbers is a person, and that person has a story. So we have people going in with 150 to 200 points and being very successful. We have some leaving. In the same way, for some students, the exit award is probably successful for them, but for many, it may well be a failure. But the thing is, we don't have any of the qualitative data to help us to make the decisions. We've got figures. We haven't got the stories. We don't understand enough about student success and what makes students successful to be able to make big decisions like this. It's not rocket science. Let's ask the students and let's get some data to help the decision making.
I think Sean would very much agree with that point. More data and more stories.
If I could just come back there, I'm not quite sure where I'm at if I actually agree with Terry. But I do agree with Terry.
Be a punch up.
And quite interestingly, I didn't say about exits. Okay, I described a position in our sector that has huge flexibility, the entry-exit, okay, re-entry. Okay, what's wrong with somebody who gets into a program of study and decides to want to do something else? How do we facilitate that? And so I think, actually, Terry, we are kind of talking about the same thing. When I talk about the 4 minus 1 minus 1, once we're talking about pluses or minuses, we're actually in a very negative territory. And that's what we need to get away from. So I absolutely agree. We need to understand how we accumulate learning for the student to the benefit of the student, and not have artificial labels on whether it's a level 6, level 7 or level 8. It's a body of learning, or indeed, as I say, minor awards, which are now become a huge part of our sector. And I think that's my point. So I don't think we're at odds.
That's great. Thank you. There's a gentleman.
Yeah, Tom Dooley, Dundalk Institute of Technology. I just wanted to have a look maybe at a role for the level 6s and level 7s, other than just on the CAO. I think they have a role there, but it's in the lifelong learning sector. Right across Europe, you have a huge professional track in the vocational vet system. We really don't have that here, but and there's a lot of talk about the new apprenticeships, and rightly so, but if you look at the old 27 craft standard apprenticeships that we have, the vast majority of those have come into our colleges over the past 40 or 50 years. And we do see them back, but it's random. It's not organised. And effectively, I think there's an opportunity. If you take it from the right up to the plasterer, up to the ESB network engineer, there's an absolute need for shall we say, coordinated, policy-driven upskilling across those trades, because the whole green economy, the new sectors in robotics, automation, and so on, are affecting all of those craft workers. And I think there's an opportunity for our sector in the technological education sector, and probably through this new THEA fund, a pilot program with the social partners, with THEA, and with the sector, to look at shall we say, organised upskilling for those craft workers. And most of those have got the advanced certificate and may have come back to our colleges, shall we say, at random. And on some programs we've designed as well. But I do think that there is an opportunity to look at this in a more organised fashion for those 27 craft trades. I only mentioned a couple of them there, the plasterers and the electricians. I'm not excluding plumbers and all of that, but that whole technological change that's taking place in all of those areas, I think, is a huge opportunity for the sector. So I wonder what people would think about that sort of some sort of pilot program in that area.
Great, thank you. Before I ask maybe Claire to respond to that, we might just go to the gentleman there just behind you with the question. Could you pass the microphone back, please? Thank you.
Peter Butler from GMIT, from Continuing Professional Development. I think the level of detail in the data needs to go a step below this one again, because an economy is functioning properly when the supply of graduates are at the NFQ levels that the jobs match. I think if you have to drill down into this, for example, and say that the software industry is looking for level 8s, not level 6s. Likewise, the engineering industry, the expert working group on the medical device sector will tell you that a 10% maximum of the positions are level 6, again, more likely level 7. So I think it's not as, the proportion of level 8 qualifications and people taking that is not a problem. It actually matches the number of jobs that are out there. I think you have to do this sector by sector. Manufacturing industry are now desperate for technicians and are upskilling operators, because what previously would have been people with technical skills have gone on to level 8s and want engineering jobs, they want desk jobs. So I think you have to start with what does the economy need. I think the role of the educational institutes is to provide people with the opportunities to come out with the qualifications for which there are jobs. That's all.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. I'm going to now ask you to speak on behalf of the economy. Thank you. What would business like? What's the IBEC perspective?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Derek for actually taking the pressure off me from saying, when I see things like 4 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1, I get very confused. And my role is to work in the area of education policy. So think about that from the perspective of an employer who you are trying to engage, that they view the education system as an education system, as a continuum of learning. And when we try to pigeonhole and use such categories, I really would welcome this discussion around kind of making things a little bit more permeable around it. But so thank you, Derek. To respond on behalf of the economy, big ask, and I'm wondering how long I have. If we look at our economy, we've seen that a lot of the younger people, let's say, who have progressed from post-second level into higher education, we have a very high level of attainment there. But within our economy, we still, across Europe, have one of the largest cohorts of workers who have not progressed beyond second level education. So that's a critical issue within our economy at present. And if you think of the pace of change that is happening within industry as a result of technological advancements, globalized supply chains, changing consumer preferences and customer preferences, and demographics in terms of who's buying products and who's no longer buying products. Businesses are being forced to be that much more agile, that much more productive, that much more innovative. And really it's going to be people and skills and competencies that are going to respond to that. So it's no wonder that the survey that Regina mentioned in her opening address this morning, that over 85% of companies are grappling with skill shortages. And then when they have to come and engage with the education sector around it, we've created layers and complex frameworks in which they try to understand. So back to William's point there is that the fact that the apprenticeship programs, Springboard, and even skill nets, they seem to be the appropriate levers in which enterprise has had a greater appreciation of qualifications and the various levels around it. And you've probably noticed that the significant large uptake have been at that level 6, level 7, and helping how do you progress, because it's very much targeted at that lifelong learning and that employee upskilling. And employers and enterprise are looking at their profile of their employees and saying, we need to move these people on so that we can actually stay innovative, stay productive, and remain in business. So the National Training Fund and the review of that National Training Fund and the Human Capital Initiative is going to give us much more opportunity around how do we bring enterprise and education closer together? How do we understand each other's kind of differences and challenges? And I really like Nessa's point around bringing the stakeholders together and losing our armour around it, because otherwise we're just not going to achieve it. And the policy imperatives are there through, you know, the systems performance framework. See, I do know the content behind it, but the employers don't. But so I am the communicator, that conduit between it. So the systems performance framework. So institutions are strategically kind of managed to engage with employers. But actually, when you put the learner at the centre of that, that's what you want to be doing as well. I don't think you're being driven by the system performance framework to do it. You're probably thinking, what is best for my learners here, regardless of what stage they're at in their education journey. And I think perhaps maybe with the paper we've tended to focus on post-second level learners, but I think what we now really need to do is maybe break. So my parting shot maybe along this line is level 6 and level 7 have a real purpose. They're not solely just for exit or entry. They're actually, maybe is it a case of repackaging and representing them to respond to some of these new emerging kind of opportunities to engage with employers at a tighter level around human capital development, around programs that can help employers tap into this potential talent pool. Because what's happening now with a tightening labour market, enterprise does not have the luxury of hiring new competencies and skills that it once had, as and when it's required. So they have to use their existing labour force or their existing employee numbers to be able to do more, to target new markets and all of that. So maybe it's a case of the education system has to learn appropriately from that. And is it a case of market diversification for level 6 and 7 and refocus and repackage that at a more, and I would agree with our colleague from Dundalk around, are we talking about this from lifelong learning? So I would just say watch this space from an IBEC perspective. We're due to launch some policy recommendations around the future of lifelong learning against this backdrop around the National Training Fund, because employers are awoken now to the concept that actually they have collateral and an imperative to participate in these discussions. But if we keep very focused on our current frameworks and the language around that, I would think we would struggle then to engage as positively and as tightly and as effectively for the learner as we possibly can.
Thank you. We have a question up here at the back.
Yeah, just a comment. I agree with some of the speakers. I think what needs to be done is not to get rid of 6 and 7, but to refocus and look at it differently. And I was at 2 events last week. One was in a second level school in a highly disadvantaged area of the country, an area in which there's a police car outside 24 hours a day. Nessa's smiling, she probably knows what school I'm talking about. It's an incredible school, highly articulated young people that really impressed me. But But when those individuals go home, first of all, they said they don't have a place or a space to do their homework. They're living in very, very different communities that any of us here, actually, I don't think anybody, from this room comes from those communities. So for one of those students to actually enter an Institute of Technology is a success for that whole block of flats, for that whole community. And I think the more of those individuals in those schools that you can actually get to do a level 6 or a level 7, that's going to have a huge knock-on effect on everybody else. And 2 days later, I was at the launch of a community storybook. And a lot of the contributors to that book, they were very simple, short stories, but a really, really nice publication, were a lot of them women, older women who had returned to education, who'd left school very, very early. So now they had gone back to further education, and this was the pinnacle of their success, that they had a 1-page or 2-page story, mainly about their own lives in that book. But if you can get those individuals now to progress to do a short cycle level 6, the impact that just has on their family, their community. So it's not just about education for the workforce, it's about the value of education itself in terms of empowering those local communities. And I think for that reason alone, it's important that we focus on how to get more individuals, both students from Leaving Cert and returners to education who've left education early to go back again. If we can focus on how to target more individuals to go into institutes of technology and into our further education colleges to return to education, I think that would be a real success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nessa, you'd like to comment on that? So anybody got the microphone?
Annette, thank you for the fabulous reminder of a point that we maybe have forgotten. TUI were welcomed and the staff reps were welcomed at the outset of today. But in any of the discussions and the vision and the success we can create, yourselves are crucial to that flexibility, that permeability, that change and that openness to changing what the contract said or changing how we do things. So thank you for the reminder that in any of our conversations, sometimes one of our biggest area of challenge and opportunity is in fact the people that make the difference in the organizations that deliver to the learner. So thank you for the reminder.
Thank you. We have a question from Brendan at the back there.
Hi, thanks Jennifer. Brendan O'Donnell, IT3. Again, sorry Derek, but I do agree with what Terry said in relation to the exit awards. I do think that, and we've lost a lot of focus, and we've discussed this before, and I think Derek, you've agreed with me, so maybe harmony will break out at the end of this discussion. I think maybe as a sector, in one instance, we've maybe been a victim of our own success. As the sector has developed and progressed, a lot of the focus has genuinely gone on to provision of level 8. And obviously the CEO applications, and that has driven a lot of that. I suppose in terms of our development of institutions has also driven a lot of that as well. And I do think that apart from specific short cycle programs that we do in conjunction either with Springboard or with industry partners, whatever, in a lot of instances what we're doing, particularly at level 6 to a lesser degree at level 7, are the introduction of an exit award to allow a student who can progress to exit with something. And I do think to make them more valid and realisable and to address the needs is that we really need to look how we actually develop programs in our sector. And instead of maybe looking at, well, we're going to develop a level 8 and everything that the student does is actually going towards that goal, we need to look at it in a more stratified form in terms of someone does 2 years of this program, what can they do, what job can they get out of it, the same with level 7 and the same with level 8. And I think that will distinguish us as well from the other HE sector. And I take the point that there are certainly, from the evidence there, the demand is at level 8. But I think you'll find that that is probably more with the regulated industries like pharma and medicine. It would be to a lesser extent when you go over to other industries, for example, like the service industries, where a lot of the jobs that are available demand a skill set at level 6 or level 7, and more importantly, have pay rates more appropriate to a level 6 or level 7 qualification. And as the cost of education is going to increase somewhere or the other, whether it's through student loans or increased fees, I think as in other jurisdictions, students will actually vote with their feet if they're expected to do level 8 programs and end up in a relatively low-skill job, as is the case in some of our qualifications. So I really think it goes back to our program development, how we structure our programs. I think we're doing a lot of it. It just needs to be called out a little bit more clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, you'd like to comment?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we're missing here really is a student consultation piece. We could all sit here all day and discuss exit awards and why are students choosing level 8s and over level 6, but why don't we ask them, what did they think about an exit award? Why are they choosing a level 8? Is it because they think that anything below that is a failure? Is it because they're afraid of unemployment? Is it because they want to set themselves up for life and they feel like the only way to do that is by doing a level 8, whether that's what they want or not? From 14, 15, when you're sitting your junior cert, you're being told, right, you have to start planning now for your points, you have to start aiming high because you want to get that level 8, you want to get your master's, you want to get your PhD. It's not do what you enjoy doing, which is what we should all be doing. There's no point in doing a job if you hate it, because you're just going to be miserable. Whereas they say, once you're happy doing what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life, and that's what we should be empowering people to do, be it through a level 5, a level 6, a level 7, or a level 8. Once that student is happy, that should be the main thing. So I do think, and the only way to achieve that is by asking students what they need, what they want, and what can we do for them.
That's great. Thank you. I think that was a really good introduction to Roisin. And so Roisin has been working with our communications group within THEA, and they've done, I suppose, a perceptions survey with the general public about their perceptions of technological higher education. So Roisin, I might just ask you to present some of the results around short cycle and first cycle. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so this study was commissioned by the entire technological higher education sector, all of our members coming together. Was as a result of last year's CAO figures, where we wanted to understand in a bit more constructive fashion what was behind some of the CAO declines in our area and behind some of the CAO gains. And we commissioned quite a significant study. It involves quantitative analysis in terms of a survey of the general public, but also a lot of qualitative analysis. And we went out and spoke to students, and I'm really glad that student voice is here at the table and actually talking again, because we need to look at why students are choosing level 8s over level 6s and 7s and understand the qualitative reasons behind that. So that's what we went out to try to do. We commissioned a study, a qualitative study of students. We also spoke to cohorts of parents as well. So these would have been students very carefully selected. We chose students, the majority of whom were open to studying in an institute of technology or a technological university. We also spoke to students who wanted to study only in a university, but not detractors of either side. So we wanted to understand the reasons behind one or the other. We also took a small deep dive into the levels and their levels of understandings of levels 6, 7, and 8. Now, there's an enormous amount of data coming out of this study, some of which we will disseminate at a later date, but I just picked out some key core statistics in relation to level 6, 7, and 8, just to bring here to the table. So who are these students and why are they saying that they would choose a level 8 over a level 6? And to use William's phrase, there really is a mentality of level 8 or bust out there. So students have said to us that they feel that a level 6, it's for those struggling academically or for those not putting in any effort. It's for those, they're not viewed in the same degree as a level 8. There's also a very strong perception that employers will not employ someone with a level 6 qualification and nothing else beyond that. So it's viewed in some ways as a stepping stone to a level 8, but if you can get into a level 8 without having to go through that level 6 or 7, then you're better off taking a level 8. And this will come out to the fore in the next slide when we talk about the likelihood to promote these different levels. We can, looking at a level 7 then, there's a bit more, they know that it's stronger, there's a stronger association with level 7 with our sectors, and there's a bit more understanding out there amongst parents and students of what a level 7 actually is. They do see it as a stepping stone to a level 8, but they also see it as a destination in itself. And what was very interesting about that, and that has come out as well in some of the comments today, is that some of the students who say, I want to be an X, rather than students to say, I want to study Y, are more likely to opt for a level 6 or a 7. So like that, what Anya was saying about the hospitality here in Cork, If that's the area that the trade that they want to work in, they will go into a level 6. They will go into a level 7 because they can see the links to employment. But if they're interested in a particular academic subject and they want to study it academically, they will look to opt into a level 8 and more than likely opt for a university rather than a THEI. So in their own words then, the level 8s are simply for those who are naturally more intelligent or work harder, for those confident in their own ability, and for those people seeking absolute independence who want to go out into the world, onto big campuses, away from home and cut all ties with home. The level 8s are looked on more favourably by employers, and again, these are the perceptions amongst the students that we spoke to. And also, some of these students are very focused on their long-term academic progression, and they see long-term academic progression towards level 9s and level 10s as being in a university at a level 8. So if we look at the next slide, actually shows what's used in market research terms as, it's called a Net Promoter Score. And this is a very simple number that you get. So you go out and you ask, how likely are you to recommend a certain thing to a friend or family member? And you ask to rank it from 0 to 10. You then look at the promoters, which are anybody who gives you a score of 9 or 10. And you look at your detractors, which is anybody who gives you a low score of between 0 and 6. You take one away from the other and you come up with a Net Promoter Score. But in market research terms, anything positive is actually positive, which stands to reason. Generally, a very good Net Promoter Score would be 20 plus. A very good Net Promoter Score, so somebody with a very strong brand who is established in the market would be looking for a score of 30 plus. Anything negative is obviously a negative score, and it wouldn't be unusual to have negative scores of -20 or -30 for some financial institutions, for example. Given where we come from, that wouldn't be surprising. So we asked this question around level 6s, level 7s and level 8s. How likely would you be to recommend this level? And we come out with an overall Net Promoter Score of level 6 of +2. Level 7 is +12, level 8 was +30. What's very interesting about this slide is if we look at the bottom figure, we broke that out around people who've attended an Institute of Technology. And this is specific to Institutes of Technology. TU wouldn't have been in the fray at this stage. And that actual Net Promoter Score for level 6 goes from +2 to -7, which means that those who've actually come through our system, those who have either attended or are attending an Institute of Technology, are less likely to recommend a level 6 course. Then when you look across the slide then to that NPS under level 8 course, higher bachelor's degree, you see that that goes up to 39. Now, in speaking with the market research company who conducted this study, we asked them, well, what is this actually telling us? And it's probably telling us that those students who are going through our system do progress from level 6 to level 8, and therefore they will recommend coming in at a level 8 before they would recommend going in at a level 6 or 7. And that feeling is being reinforced then through our student and our parent communities. But the other interesting thing to look at this, and this comes out in a different part of the survey, if you look at the image associations for our sector, so where are our sector, the technological higher education institutions, where are they perceived as being different, positively different? And the two areas that they're perceived as being positively different are in their links to employers and providing skills that will lead to greater employment opportunities. Those areas stand out very strongly amongst all adults, amongst those who've been through an Institute of Technology, and amongst those who've been through a university. If you look at the same then image profile for universities, universities stand out in reputation and pathways to master's and PhD programs. They score very low on links to employment. They score very low on providing skills that will lead to employment opportunities. And then when you ask the students what they want, they are looking for a program that provides them with pathways to employment. So that's a key opportunity. And whatever rethinking that needs to be done around the promotion of and the communication of and the improvement of perceptions around level 6 or 7, I suggest it's probably in that area.
Thank you, Roisin. Colm, you wanted to come into the discussion there.
I'm really interested in some of the data was reported there, and thanks very much for it, and some just correlating it back to some of the points that Sean made earlier on. It struck me that the reasons for students withdrawing or not completing successfully are not necessarily down to do with learning, but they're to do with family, financial reasons. They're sociological issues. And some more nuanced profile of the students that are not completing and why they're not completing would be quite interesting to find out. Do they fall into the access categories? Are they students with disabilities? What are the employment prospects of those students with disabilities who are dropping out or finishing or not completing level 6? Or did they take the option to stay on level 7 to stay in the education system because they know that perceivably they don't have many options in employment later on? I'm very interested to see what happens to them afterwards, as in, do they drop, do they finish or exit with a level 6 award and go into employment? Do they perceive that as success? And it goes back to some of the questions that came up earlier on in relation to perception of what is the success of a student. And there seems to be a differing opinion between how a student perceives it and maybe how the institutes perceive it. There's different opinions there. But if a student is to finish level 6 and go into employment, do they return 4 to 5 years later and take up opportunities at level 7? Do they take up opportunities for professional qualifications through their employers? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for further study, which gives us a much more nuanced understanding of the actual profile of students and why they don't complete.
Brian McGuire, QQI. Several speakers have referred to the strength of level 6 and 7 programs as being their link to occupations in the labour market, but that's also possibly their weakness, because we've seen how from the data that Roisin presented there that students are looking towards the employment opportunities, and they may actually be quite good employment prognosticators. There's some data. CIDFOP, the European Agency for Vocational Education and Training, runs a skills panorama across Europe. It's a little bit like the Future Skills, well, it is part of the Future Skills work that we do here in Ireland. And they have observed the phenomenon of the hollowing out of the demand for skills across occupations, that the demand over the 20 years from the mid-90s, the demand for high-level occupations has gone up, and the demand for elementary occupations has also risen, but the demand, there's a U-shaped curve, and the number of vacancies, number of opportunities in mid-level skills, which is the 6s and 7s, has hollowed out. And I won't give any prizes if you guess which country in Europe had the biggest hollowing out of its mid-level skills demands in that period from the mid-90s onwards. So the data that we've seen, both from sort of cumulatively over the decade that Sean's work looked at, this is the wisdom of the crowd, spotting labour market trends. And so a policy question for us, that doesn't mean, of course, that there are no ongoing requirements for replacement and for continuing employment in the mid-level skills we heard, for example, about culinary arts. But it does raise a policy question about how do we, because if there's an overall sort of halo effect that affects students' interest in this space, in this mid-level space, then we have to ask, well, how do we correct for that market failure, if you like, because it may leave certain occupations entirely underserved. And arguably, this is one of the areas where our apprenticeship activity, which provides a significant form of subsidy and combines labour market insertion along with skills development, is a way of addressing this through a highly subsidised and expensive form of education.
It was interesting to hear you represent that research, Brian. And I mean, I think it is a bit of a contested space in terms of the hourglass economy perspective. But I mean, I think there's a real complexity to it, and it's something that needs to be properly analysed and assessed. I mean, the recent work by the OECD, I don't think would sort of bear out that view that hollowing out is a trend that we can expect to inform job opportunities into the future. I do want to put on the table, though, and I mean, it's related to the point that you made and the point that several other people made, the sort of C word, credentialism. Because what we're seeing playing out, and there's a really significant issue of asymmetric information here, there's very significant employment opportunities and good employment opportunities for people with employment-focused vocational technical qualifications. We've heard a lot recently about wage premium from degrees, and that's borne out by the Indicon research, but that's an average measure comparing the average degree holder to the average person who doesn't have any tertiary qualifications. In countries with advanced and developed systems of vocational education, the Denmarks, the Netherlands of this world, the evidence is that the wage premium for having a degree over having a sub-degree tertiary qualification is small, if not non-existent. So I think we really need to think through and worry a lot about the kind of perceptions and perspectives that are being represented in the research that Roisin introduced, because they have us in a world where people are just blindly chasing level 8 qualifications. Now, you're then into the whole issue of what is the quality and the caliber of the qualification that they're seeking to achieve. And that's a whole different other story. But I mean, if it leads to a situation where opportunities for sub-degree level tertiary qualifications just fall away, are not valued, are dismissed by society, we've really missed an opportunity and created a huge difficulty for ourselves.
Just to pick up on 2 points, I think first of all there's need for a very joined up thinking approach, going right from first level to fourth level, in terms of, I think, the demand that there is for the mid-level, whether it's there or not, the level of for those graduates, for those competences and skills. And if it's there, then inform the second and first level sector about it. Similarly, and it's slightly off point here, but we are aware, there are certain areas of STEM, for example, where we cannot meet the employer demand for graduates, and yet we can't feed the pipeline coming in certain areas of science and physical sciences, for example. So there needs to be joined up thinking. We've seen reports looking for graduates in those areas and I suppose calling out the need to do something there in education, and I think we just need to think about that in a more kind of, as has been referred to, in a joined up way, all working together. The second piece of the exercise, and going back to Terry's point about the value of the award in itself, whether it's an exit award or it's whether the student decided to come and do the level 7 and decided that's enough for me for now, that award must stand and have value in its own right. And I suppose looking to the demands in relation to employability of our graduates and so on, there is more of a need, even at level 7, we'll say, for capstone pieces in relation to placement and project. And so if you have a 3+1 model, that's where we've found a little bit of it's harder to kind of pad in all the content. So there's a communication exercise then as well with our professional bodies who are very important to us in this sector in terms of getting the recognition for our programs, and to, I suppose, consult with them, not just in relation to the knowledge and the kind of technical skills, but overall in relation to the softer skills and independent thinking and so on. So that while you mightn't have that kind of overall same content realised, that it's a more cohesive piece, building across knowledge, skill and competence across the full ambit.
Thank you. Regina would like to make a comment. Margaret, could you? Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Just maybe to make sorry, Regina. Just to make that.
Excuse me.
I hand over to the chair.
Does the host have the right to hog the microphone?
No, just two very small points. I mean, we mentioned, and Sean mentioned the Bologna agreement, which we signed up to, was in 2005, and as the economy was doing fairly okay, we were heading towards, if you want to become a chartered engineer, you need a level 9, you needed a master's or a diploma engineer on the continent. But in that, like your 3+2, the level 7 exit was seen as the employability hub or the mobility hub. And there's a trick there I think we're missing within our sector in particular, that there is that mobility hub at level 7, whether the mobility is to go and do your level 9 somewhere else, or actually enter into employment. Just to make a comment as well, over the last number of years, there were no jobs until quite recently. So students were staying on to do level 8s and level 9s. So that's a little bit of a historical thing as well. So I'll hand over to the chair.
Thanks very much. And actually, it's a really, really interesting discussion. I suppose I was just thinking of a quotation from Nelson Mandela, and he said that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. And if I think back to my own entry into level 6 as it was at the time, I came from a background that nobody had ever gone to third level education in my family. Now, it was 30 years ago. There are still people in Ireland in that situation today. And the fact that I could go and start and put a toe in the water by going the level 6 route initially meant, because I didn't know whether I'd survive a degree program, I didn't know whether third level education would be for me. And I think that access and getting a toe in the water was hugely important. I still think it is very important today. And I think the other thing is this obsession, and I saw it with my own daughter, who did her Leaving Cert a couple of years ago, with having to make a lifetime decision at that moment in time that we have come to in Ireland is crazy. I did my level 6 in Waterford. I came down to Cork, I did a diploma. I was lucky enough to exit, happy with my diploma, got a job. To matriculate, I did 2 distance learning courses in Heriot Watt. I did finance and I did organisational behaviour, and then I went on and did, in 2000, an MBA in DCU. And I'm still looking, what am I going to do next? And I've done other courses. Do you know what I mean? My point is, I think there's too much pressure in the system on a very short window for kids. I think it is, somebody mentioned about, you know, other people and going back to work and learning, going back into education when you're older. You know, I think we need to kind of look at it as, it is lifelong learning. That is a fact. You know, the jobs in 2 years, 3 years' time haven't even been created yet in some cases. So I think we need to be much more flexible and open in our approach here and realise that education in itself is a wonderful thing.
Hi, Ray Ryan, Waterford IT, and it's great to hear one of our graduates progressed so well. We'll claim her first, Barry, thanks. But the point is actually very well made, and the point has been very well made by the panel. I'm a practitioner, I'm a lecturer, and we see it in the classroom. The level 6 is coming in on a lot of the time reasonably low points, and we see the progression rate. Some of the figures that have been presented there from the CEO, which is the CEO data rather than the FE coming through, which is a different analysis which is needed completely, and I think you would find far better progression rates and success rates from people that have come through in the FE sector. And this is part of the problem. The level 6 and 7s were described, I think it was Derek described them, as almost there's a second list. And it's almost, if you're not getting onto the level 8 program, this obsession by society, you have to go to college, you know, to tell our kids, you have to go to college. You have to try get the level 8 program for career advancement and for opportunity. It's kind of been conditioned by a lot of the parents into the children and into society, where in a lot of cases, a lot of those 200-point kids coming in and doing level 6 programs would be far better off not in an institute of technology at all, and in a trade or a further education context. And the level 6, level 7 opportunity, I think we see it as practitioners, where you do have the outreach programs with industry. You see people that are later, more mature in life, maybe over 25, 26, and have worked in an environment where they've now decided, now is the time for me to make progression. And yet 4 years seems too long. So the level 6s and 7s, the 2 and the 3 year programs, are much better suited for them in terms of making progression at that stage of their life and at that stage of their career. And you know, one of the brilliant things I think about the HE sector, our sector, is we do not discriminate and we do not put barriers up to people coming into the sector. And I think maybe sometimes we need to look at, sometimes the emphasis can be to get bums on seats, you know, to go chase funding, rather than looking at really what are the needs of those students. And it's, again, the stats are very interesting from those CEO at level 6, particularly if you look at what happens to them. So I think we said 50% or 55% of them progress. That means there's a huge dropout rate at that level. And of those that complete, 73% go on to further study, and only 23% end up in employment, which is a very small percentage of those that entered level 6 in the first place. And that's really, I think, where we're looking at some of the data, where the further analysis is needed, and maybe the policy needs to change a little bit as well. I think there's huge opportunity for the further ed sector to work, particularly in that level 6 space, to try develop, you know, relationships, bring people along to level 5 and 6. I've taught some of those that have come through from the FE sector, and I have to say, you know, they were the best students in a level 6 program and progressed on to level 7 subsequently. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady in the centre there.
Hi, I'm Eilish Bergen from the Department of Education, from the Access Policy side. I think it's, would agree with an awful lot of what has been said here today, but there is a really, I suppose, from the point of view of access to higher education and the various different groups, some are doing very well. We're making some progress in relation to the socioeconomically disadvantaged. We're making progress in relation to students with a disability. But there are fall-offs in some of our target groups, particularly mature students. So I suppose I have always felt, I suppose personally, that the IoTs have had a huge influential effect. If you're to look back in terms of transformation in getting people into higher education over the last 25 years. But there are still sectors of society still not getting into higher education. And flexible provision is really important from the point of view of people who are coming from highly disadvantaged areas or have disadvantage coming as a result of disability or cultural barriers associated with where they're coming from. So I suppose I would very much caution against, I suppose what I would say is that I think the flexibility to be able to come into education and the opportunity cost for the student, because students coming from this highly disadvantaged areas are motivated by a lot of factors, including getting a job and getting money. So the importance of, I suppose, the importance of flexible provision and maintaining a flexibility of provision, because it is, and I would very much agree with what you said around, and I was one of those students myself where, you know, for a lot of students coming in, are making this, where they feel that higher education is beyond them, then it's important, like a 4-year degree can be too high a bar in terms of, the nervousness of undertaking that. So having the opportunity to go in for shorter term courses, or at least having a view that when you go into higher education, whatever time you spend in there gives you an outcome. So the idea of exit awards, whatever way you do it, whether you do it upwards or downwards, it's really important for the disadvantaged groups that are still not making their way into higher education to have a flexible provision. So I just want to, I suppose, echo some of what has actually been said already here today, but just to speak on behalf of the groups that are still not making that transition.
Thank you. Terry, maybe you might talk to us a little bit maybe about the sort of student success factors then, and is there anything different between student success factors in level 6 and 7 versus level 8, and anything that maybe these things can influence on where people's background, where they're coming in from?
I don't know that we have enough data to be able to say it. We know a lot about CAO coming in. We know a lot that course choice is probably the single biggest determinant of success. We know a lot that we're not probably as a sector not doing enough to make sure that we're communicating very clearly what we're actually offering and what's involved. We've done a lot of work with FET students, and certainly when they come in to the sector, they are much better prepared. They make the transition much easier, and we have that data. I think that, I've always believed, it's where you finish rather than where you start that's important. And some students require more support earlier. Some students, when they come out of school, they've gone through a system perhaps hasn't actually suited their particular way that they actually learn. They go into perhaps a level 6 program, they get the kind of supports they need, and they can progress to a level 8. But we need to make sure that within our institutions we give them those opportunities to be able to progress, and we give them the support when they need it at that time.
Anya, you wanted to respond?
I might make one quick comment in relation to your point, mature learners. I think we need to look at the data in relation to part-time students. I would suspect that in every evening class in our institutes, there are students for whom it's their first time to education and they're over 23. There are students who've come, like Tom set out, who've come from a craft background and who are now trying to find that way back to level 7 and 8 learning, possibly by taking additional modules. We certainly would have them in CIT. And I think in terms of demonstrating the impact of the sector, we need to look at the data. If we can find some way of exploring and interrogating data in relation to part-time learners, it would be very informative, I think.
Okay, thank you. Colin.
So I'd echo those points. The IUA are working at the moment with a number of stakeholders, including the IoT sector and the universities, in identifying the challenges in the cohorts that are in part-time education, not just in part-time, and what part-time education even encapsulates. Does it encapsulate online learning? Is it flexible learning? Are people literally on campus as well? What are their profile? Are they students who entered into an IoT took a level 6 qualification, went into employment, and then subsequently, 5 years later, there they are sitting in a classroom taking a level 7 qualification on campus by night. Are they now a mature student? Did they enter into the college with a disability? What level of support are they receiving? But in the initial instance, when they did finish with a level 6 qualification and exited the college, how do we consider what did we consider them to be successful or unsuccessful? Do we consider their learning journey to be closed? And I don't think we can really derive too many conclusions on that, or otherwise we're placing our own misconceptions upon them. And therefore, again, it goes back to the point that we need more data longitudinally, not just on the full-time cohort, but the part-time cohorts that are currently out there, and there's a dearth of it, and we would like some more, please.
That's a very good way to end. I'm just going to ask Sean just to respond to that, and then I think we're over time now already, so we'll have to close out so that we can get on to the next item in our programme. But if someone could pass the microphone to Sean, that would be good.
It's okay. I'll abuse my position in proximity to this mic, if I may. Can you hear me? I don't want in any way to take time from the hugely important group of people who just walked into the room. You're very welcome. We're running a little bit later than we had planned, but you are very welcome to our the final pieces of our discussion. In terms of the discussion this morning, two questions occurred to me, which I think I will leave you to reflect on over lunch, and we may pick them up later on this afternoon. I think one is an easy question, and one is a more difficult question. So if I start with the more difficult question, which is, from a policy perspective, what is expected of our sector to respond adequately and effectively to the needs of access, widening participation, and also policy initiatives such as metrics associated with technological universities and an apparent focus on other parts of the provision? So that's the easy question. No, I'm joking. That I think is a slightly more difficult question to respond to. But the other question that's come up, we talked a lot about perceptions. We've talked a lot about level 7 appearing to have a place. I wonder, is that related to the title of the award? I wonder, is an ordinary bachelor degree a little bit easier to understand and relate to an honours bachelor degree than a higher certificate? So there are two questions I would suggest we reflect on over lunch. We allow the most important people in the room to actually have their opportunity, and I'll hand back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. Before we go, I think can we just give a round of applause to our panel? Thank you very much, and just ask them to make your way over here for a photo before we sit down. Thank you.
Four chairs just over here. Four chairs. Thanks very much. So why I get some people sitting as well. I'll just move these guys.
Folks, thanks very much for your indulgence, just for pictures there at the end. We come to a celebratory piece just before we look forward to lunch. And again, just to echo our apologies to the students. It's our tardiness. We kept you waiting. We do apologize for that. And you're the real focus of this. Just to share with the students who've just joined us here, we've been talking this morning about transformation and the transformative effect of education, particularly undergraduate education within this sector. We are talking a lot about data-informed peace, as we did our study this morning. But a very good colleague of mine said to me many, many years ago, if you want to have the effect, tell the story. And I think we are, as Irish people, we're a storied people. Narrative is our natural home. And when I was invited to open up this session by Deirdre and saw the first copy of this Access to Student Voice, I read these stories with huge interest. I just want personally to congratulate you. And I think your stories, not only yours, but your stories tell something. They're emblematic of the stories of so many people that have gone through this particular sector over the years. So to Roisin, where is Roisin? Roisin, to the work you did on this, thank you very much. And to Deirdre, just congratulations again on this. I was very taken, and copies of the booklet have been given out with your stories in them to this audience, which is drawn from all over the sector, policymakers, agencies, etc. And I was very taken by Anne's comment in her piece here. You must use opportunities that come your way. Attend panel discussions on issues. Get connected to society in new environments, which is exactly what we're doing. Let me pass over to the President, Dr. Parry O'Connor.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you for your heroes, for trailblazers, for listening and your stories within this book. I remember back maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we had a previous edition of this. And at that stage, we were looking at, when the labour market activation started up and springboard and so on. Because there was a lot of unemployment, to my mind, there was a huge emphasis being put on second chance education, second chance skills upgrading, slightly to the disadvantage of first chance education. And I remember one of our graduates 2 years back, in the first edition of the Student Voice, made his way through college, and now his father is almost through college as well. So first chance and second chance has come by, and we have the same story here this morning as well. These students, we talk about access to education. These students are trailblazers. They made their own pathways through college. They made their own pathways facilitated by our excellent access service here at THEA, but also facilitated and supported right along the way by our academic staff, by our support staff, by the canteen staff, by everybody in the institute. A bit like THEA, just to be facilitated from our point of view, our access service here work very, very hard, but thin on the ground. They need the services and support of our colleagues right across the institute. But that's grand, but you also need excellent students who are prepared to work, who are prepared to, as I said, blaze their own pathway through. And we're very, very proud of being here this morning, and always have been. And congratulate you on, committing your stories to print. We were talking this morning about various matters, and a lot of it comes down to being evidence. Show us the evidence of students who actually come through the system who've done well, who've been outstanding students, outstanding masters. This is the evidence we need. And like triple thanks to Deirdre for this initiative going back a number of years now, and to Roisin Arnold, who did tremendous work on this particular edition. So well done to everybody. And I hand over to Deirdre to give the real story behind these great heroes at the CIT, great heroes for our sector. Well done.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you very
stakeholders. Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. We provide a number of initiatives for stakeholders at pre-entry level, where we work very closely with 22 linked second-level schools, community groups, Cork ETB, and local and statutory and voluntary organisations. At post-entry level, the Access and Disability Service prides itself on providing a wide range of effective series of supports that enhance the academic experience and learning outcomes of its students. This publication today highlights 10 student stories, but to just give you some context, and I know we were talking earlier about statistics and they not really painting the true picture, it's important though that I think you understand, I suppose, some of the numbers of students that we're supporting here today. From our previous academic year, the CIT Access Service supported 463 students with financial support through the ESF Student Assistance Fund, the Hardship Fund, and the 1916 bursaries. The team engaged with 4,107 students, parents, teachers through our pre-entry programs. There were in excess of 1,500 post-entry student engagements throughout the academic year. And in 2017-18, there was a 6% increase in the number of students who registered with the Disability Support Service, 13% increase in the number of new entrants. That was 801 students registered with our Disability Support Service, and 557 of whom were successful in being supported by the Fund for Students with Disabilities. I think I speak for all of the Access team when I say that the work that we do can be at times very challenging, but extremely rewarding. Every day I am inspired by students who come through our door, and in particular the students that are here today, and I want to really sincerely thank them for being part of this publication and having the courage to share your story so that others can be inspired by it. We have met with students who, against the odds, have managed to drive on regardless of the obstacles, regardless of the pressure, regardless of the demands. Taking the step into full-time study is a big decision for anyone, and it can be hugely demanding. Add into the mix the juggle of study and family commitments, the fact that you may have a learning difference, a disability, studying a program in a language that is not your native tongue, studying when your peers or friends do not share the same educational values or ambitions as you. We have 10 student stories portrayed in our publication in this edition. 2 of the students portrayed had family members in the previous edition of the Student Voice, and there was some discussion here earlier this morning around the impact of learning, not just on the individual, but also the families and the communities that they come from. So we have Anne here in the audience, who is a mature student, was inspired to return to education by her son Ashvin, who was supported by the CIT Access Service a number of years ago and graduated with an honours degree. And Breda, a member of the traveller community, whose brother TJ graduated with an honours degree in CIT in 2017. I have no doubt that all of these students here today are already positively influencing so many in their families and in their communities, and I want to thank them most sincerely. So, just to give you a flavour of some of the stories, I have one volunteer who has agreed to share his story. Cain is portrayed in the booklet, and Cain is going to tell you his story about his educational journey so far. So I'd like to invite Cain Caulfield up here to speak with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Just to give you a small kind of background where I am at the moment, I'm third year of Business Information Studies, or Systems, excuse me. I'm currently on placement in Janssen in Ringaskiddy. Now, if you had told me that 4 or 5 years ago, I'd look at you square in the face with no emotion, and I wouldn't have believed you. Let's just take you back to where I was, say, 4th or 5th year, where without even being out in CIT, I was already experiencing one of the services that CIT offer. as we all know, in 4th or 5th year, you're kind of deciding what to do next after school. And I didn't know whether to go to college or what to do, basically. This is where the first service came in. CIT, in collaboration with Johnson & Johnson, have the Access to Education Bridge to Employment programme. Now I could spend the next half an hour talking about this programme, and it massively helped me to where I am now. But putting it briefly, they provided mentoring, they provided site tours to J&J sites, and career talks. And it was during the mentoring where I really discovered what I wanted to do in college and where I wanted to go. So that was the course I'm doing now, which is BIS in CIT. So I've now found out what I wanted to do. So then the Leaving Cert came up, and I was happy. I did a really good Leaving Cert, but unfortunately I just fell short of BIS in CIT. And it was a kind of numb feeling. You know, I did really well in the Leaving and I was so happy of what I achieved, but I just fell short of the course that I really, really wanted. And this is where the second service from CIT really helped me. When I was in school, I signed up for the CIT progression scheme. Now at the time, it's something that our guidance counsellor says sign up for, and whether or not it affects you is another thing. It massively affected me. I rang the Access office, and I got in contact with Deirdre Creedon. And I'll never forget the phone call. I can recall it right now. And she said, look, the Access team, we'll try our best. We understand you're in the progression scheme, so we'll try. But I still was very negative. I don't think I'm going to get my place. So 3 or 4 days later, Deirdre rang me again. And said, look, there's a position here for you in BIS in CIT. And I could have ran out to CIT when I heard the news. And I was really, really grateful. So already CIT has, before I even sat down in my first lecture, has already influenced what I wanted to do, where I wanted to do it, and actually getting into BIS. So another service, and the last of the services that I'll be talking about, is the Student Assistance Fund that Deirdre has already mentioned. College, as you all know, isn't very cheap. It is expensive, whether it's getting to college, whether it's accommodation or other circumstances. It doesn't come cheap. So the Student Assistance Fund was made aware to me, and I applied for it. And when you fill out a few forms, and there was an interview in the Access in the team. And for whatever reason, I kind of felt it would be more of an interrogation than an actual. It was just an interview, and to say it was an interview would be putting it mildly. The 2 people in there were just so caring, so kinding, and this could kind of be summed up by the whole Access team out here in CIT. They're just so warming, so welcoming, and they really do make, despite dealing with all the students that Deirdre already mentioned, hundreds upon hundreds, they do make each student feel special, like they belong here. And I was very grateful that I did get funding from that Student Assistance Fund. They're the 3 services that I've portrayed in this booklet. And the headline of my section here is that no obstacle is too big to get here. And how I'd like to finish up is, if there's a way, or if there's a will, and if you're willing to provide a will, then CIT, I can guarantee you CIT will provide a way for you to get to college. And that's my part of this booklet. So I say thank you.
learner choice as to what what they study and how they study and what they sign up to. And I think that as a sector, I think I'd be sorry if there was if level 6 and level 7 wasn't to continue. So before I close this particular session, I just want to thank my colleagues from the Access team who really